healthcare sector and the innovative companies here in Alberta. The response we've seen by Alberta companies during this time has been nothing short of remarkable. I personally have received all kinds of different interests from industry looking to find ways to mitigate COVID impacts, looking to retool their manufacturing processes, their product lines in support of personal protection equipment, in terms of vaccine research, in terms of other types of COVID mitigation efforts. The effort by our entrepreneurs in this province has been incredible, as well as our health system demonstrating its nimbleness during this crisis. We've seen the launching of healthcare apps to relieve pressure on clinics and hospitals. I'd note that AHS's online COVID diagnostic tool was one of the first of its kind in North America, and there was lots of provinces that adopted the algorithms as a result, and it's helped thousands out. We've seen all kinds of companies and researchers working around the clock to develop COVID tests and vaccines and manufacture personal protection equipment. With the launching of global hackathon and to encourage the creation of solutions in light of COVID, the list goes on. And it's truly inspiring in the face of this disruption that Albertans are stepping up to the plate when it matters. Prior to this pandemic, though, we were seeing the beginnings of a health sector transformation in this province, brought on by the unlocking of our health data, and COVID has certainly accelerated and enhanced the need for this. Health data and digital technologies really do hold the promise for improved treatments and better patient outcomes, which we now need more than ever. And moving towards unlocking our data and developing digital health technologies is not without its challenges. There's regulatory barriers, there's access to capital issues, there's privacy concerns, and there's developing a labor force with skills to manipulate that health data, that are all things that I'm sure our panelists are going to speak to today. But in spite of these challenges, we have some fundamental strengths in this province, and it's our medical research powerhouse. It's our home to world-class medical facilities and post-secondary schools, not to mention a number of well-established health companies and entrepreneurs, and our integrated health system. And if we want to be a leader in digital healthcare, we must continue to leverage our strengths in areas like artificial intelligence, machine learning, health diagnostics, and leverage virtual reality, blockchain, and other types of platforms to facilitate innovation in the healthcare system. So this brings me to my panelists that have extensive real-world experience and have been through the trials and tribulations of just that and more. I'm going to introduce each of them and then ask each of them to spend just a couple minutes giving their thoughts in general around this topic, and then we'll go to a Q&A. So first, I'd like to introduce Reg Joseph. Reg is the CEO of Edmonton Health City. He's well regarded in the local health innovation community and brings broad experience to his role as CEO of Edmonton Health City. He previously served as an equity analyst for a Boston-based healthcare investment bank and an executive resident with Tech Edmonton, as well as the CEO of a local technology company called Metabolomic Technologies. He also has served as the Vice President of Health at Alberta Innovates Health Solutions. Reg has been a critical part of our health innovation ecosystem in this province. Reg, would you like to give a few introductory remarks?
Sure. Thanks very much, Justin. One of the things that I'd like to say when we talk about digital health and where that's going is our listeners will know that we've seen large transformations in a number of sectors like transportation, media, banking, and those transformations are coming to health, but unfortunately they've been coming to other jurisdictions outside of Canada. And so our big opportunity here is to have those transformations come to Canada, into Alberta, and drive better health outcomes for us, but also the opportunity to drive economic development. And that's the mandate of Health City.
Great. Thanks, Reg. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Martin Ferguson-Pell at the University of Alberta, former Dean of Rehab Medicine. He's a biomedical engineer and credentialed clinician scientist. His current positions include professor at the Faculty of Rehab Medicine at the U of A and executive director at the Alberta Bone and Joint Institute. He's dedicated his academic career to the study of secondary complications of physical disability and studying underlying causes to reduce their incidence. And he has many accomplishments, too many to go through here today, including the design and developing of the new rehab robotics laboratory in the Edmonton Clinic Health Academy, creating a living laboratory network in partnership with TELUS Health Solutions to start the role technologies can play in community, and establishing a startup, Click and Push Accessibility Inc. Martin?
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody, for coming along today. Yeah, I'm wearing these two hats. One is the Executive Director of the Alberta Bone and Joint Health Institute. And what we do in ABJHI is we provide information and knowledge to the health system based on data that we're able to collect from clinicians and administrative data from Connect Care and so on. And this enables us to optimize the way our healthcare system delivers bone and joint health interventions and programs right across the province. And so what I would say in that context is that one of the great challenges is we can generate knowledge, but the question is, how do we achieve adoption? So this is one of the things I would like to talk about as we go forward today, is how do we create this continuum from knowledge generation to adoption so that we actually benefit from the solutions that we're creating in Alberta. As far as my role at the University of Alberta is concerned, the two areas, as Justin was outlining, are using virtual and augmented reality to enhance learning, and using quite sophisticated techniques for doing that create immersive simulations that incorporate artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and a whole variety of other things, a rapidly emerging field that I think is a very exciting area for Alberta to develop. And then the second area that is very timely is Tele Rehab. And this is the delivery of rehabilitation assessments to people who live in rural Alberta. And during COVID, what can we do to help people who live in urban Alberta who are having to exercise social distancing, but still need to receive these interventions? There's technology and data that can really support that. So those are two quick things that I was going to throw on the table. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to introduce Mike Meldrum, who's the CEO of Calgary Health Trust. Mr. Meldrum is a fundraising professional with over 20 years of experience. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree at the U of C and an MBA from the U of A. Prior to his appointment as CEO of Calgary Health Trust, Mr. Meldrum held various positions at the University of Lethbridge, University of Alberta, and NAIT as Associate Vice President of Advancement. He has been at the helm of campaigns raising in excess of $100 million and brings a breadth of nonprofit knowledge from his work in the post-secondary sector. Over 23 years, Calgary Health Trust has invested hundreds of millions of dollars, which has led to significant improvements, innovations, and enhancements to the care of Calgarians. Mike.
Thank you, Jason, and grateful to be here and part of this panel today. I would just say I am fairly new to the digital healthcare space, so but appreciate being as a fund acute care centers in Calgary, as well as community health, as well as extended or continuing care. It is really the realm of healthcare in Calgary, and we're always looking at the Calgary Health Trust to see how we can accelerate the changes in healthcare that will ultimately improve the patient experience and patient outcomes. So really the lens that I have is that of a funder and also representing the donors within the community that are wanting to see improvements in healthcare. And I think all of the community expects access to the best the world has to offer with respect to healthcare. And I think there's also an awareness that the digital space and digital healthcare solutions are going to improve not only access, but the outcomes for patients. And so there's real interest that the donors have in the research that is going to inform the best practice and also how to improve accessibility and ultimately those outcomes. And I think the digital space we're talking about today will offer many solutions to that, including machine learning and other things that are sure to come up today. But grateful to be part of it and have a different perspective as I represent really the donors and as a funder that is trying to sort of accelerate the change we would like to see in the healthcare system. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Finally, I'm going to introduce Matthew Parker, who's manager of the public sector at Alta ML. Matthew completed his Doctor of Philosophy in Biochemistry and went on to obtain his MBA at York University to bridge his vast technical abilities into business. Prior to his current role, Matthew held several positions at Mount Sinai Hospital, Deloitte Canada, in strategy and operations for health transformation, and at the Ontario Bioscience Innovation Organization. Throughout his research career, commercialization interests at the intersect of private and public healthcare. Alta ML helps companies leverage their data with AI and ML to deliver significant return on investment and new forms of competitive advantage. They have many strategic relationships in Alberta with their co-development model, including ones with Williams Engineering, Dynalife, Aimco, and PCL. Matthew.
Thanks, Justin. So as Justin mentioned, one of our pillars in Alberta and Canada-wide is healthcare. And of course, ML is kind of that hot area of digital innovation. And so one thing I want to talk about a bit today is how do we do this from a Canadian perspective? To Justin's point, we hear again and again that we're missing all these things in Canada. There might be trouble with capital, experience commercializing, things like that. But what I'm here today to say is it doesn't matter where you are, there's always going to be challenges. And I think we have an amazing opportunity within Alberta, within Canada, to do a lot more to drive economic value, develop innovative healthcare solutions, and really help people in a Canadian way. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to some of our prepared questions to get the conversation going. So I'm going to ask all of you as an opening, can you give us some sense of what are some of the most interesting digital health technologies you've seen in Alberta? And perhaps, Reg, you could kick us off with some of the great companies you've been working with on the entrepreneurial endeavors that have crossed your path.
Thanks very much, Justin. There are so many wonderful companies in Alberta right now. Actually, there's been an explosion of these. So let me touch base on a couple of them. In the artificial intelligence machine learning realm, of course, there's AltaML, and I'll leave that to Matt to talk a little bit about. But there's another company, a local company called Meadow AI, which has developed a machine learning algorithm that allows people who are not experienced in medical imaging to be able to take medical images, have those images then remotely evaluated by a radiologist, and have immediate diagnoses. So that's a very interesting technology that's been developed here. One of the other trends that's happening in Canada is this whole idea of home health monitoring and the ability for patients to monitor themselves at home. And then more importantly, to be able to tap that data back in to healthcare professionals. So there's a local company started up by a physician at the University of Alberta called MMHG that has a device that allows patients to record a blood pressure and other vitals and share that not only with physicians, but other care providers like nurses and pharmacists. So that's really interesting too. One of the things that we've heard about in other sectors, as we all know, is security of data. And there's a local company in Calgary called Bright Squid that works with clinicians and physicians' offices to enable them to share images and messages with patients and other clinical providers using a secure email system, but also providing added security for digital health records. And lastly, another exciting technology in between Edmonton and Calgary out of Red Deer called OpenXmed, another physician, Dr. Cole Murphy, who's developed a decision support tool. We know that there's so many new medical discoveries and findings that are happening around the world. And for a physician today to be able to keep ahead of all of that is really challenging. So what OpenXmed has done is created a decision support tool so that physicians have ready access to all that information that's coming on a daily basis so they can update their practice real time as we're working with patients. So that's just a few of them, Justin. I could definitely go on.
Matt, did you want to weigh in some of the interesting digital health technologies that have crossed your path and maybe speak a little bit more to what AltaML is doing in this space?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some really strong players. Reg has mentioned some great companies. Another one comes to mind is Nanostics. They're using ML on their back end to better diagnose prostate cancer. For us, working on a few different areas, everything from care pathway prediction to cancer prognosis. Actually working with Martin on a few things as well. So there's some good work going on. One I can talk about a bit more in depth is our collaboration with Dynalife. So for pathology, I didn't know this before moving to Edmonton, but some of the highest volumes of pathology samples in North America are seen by Dynalife. So we have this unparalleled talent, knowledge base, and access local to Edmonton, to Alberta. And what they've done is they're investing very heavily in digital pathology. So moving away from a microscope to actually a digitized slide. And so we're working with them to build out essentially a AI layer that can help the pathologist, help the technicians, help essentially the patients get results better, quicker, cheaper. And so one of our first projects with them is focused on workflow improvement. So not taking decision away from the pathologist, but how do we get them the right information at the right time so they can actually make the decision quicker and at a lower cost. And so not only do they get results out faster, but one of the big concerns in our system today is how do we afford doing more with less? And digital innovation is the way to do it.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard about some companies. I'd like to hear a little bit more about Alberta's competitive strengths in the health technology, digital health technology space. We talk about our machine learning advantages coming out of Amy and University of Alberta. Reg, I'm wondering if you can give us a little sense of what you're hearing from investors and entrepreneurs as to what our strengths are in this province relative to digital health technologies.
Sure, thanks, Justin. In addition to artificial intelligence and machine learning that everyone knows, Martin will probably talk about the area of extended reality, which is virtual and augmented reality, which is a key strength in Alberta that's driving digital health. The other areas are virtual care, and that's something that will likely come up later on in our conversations. And then the last area, which I think is a really interesting emerging area that we have some strong capabilities in, is this whole concept of Internet of Things and being able to connect devices and then have those devices connect back to an electronic medical record for continuity of care. So these are some of the key areas that we have some strengths in the Alberta region.
Great. Can I get you to weigh in on this as well, Martin?
Yeah, so I was going to take a slightly different tack and say I think one of the great strengths we have is having a single provincial healthcare system. And the reason for that is because it helps us to create coordinated, high quality data. So when we're looking at tools such as those that can be used in AI, being applied to healthcare, we're working with the potential for much better and much more coordinated, less fragmented data sets than we would have if we were broken up into 13 different healthcare regions. So this I see as a real powerhouse for Alberta in having a sufficiently large population to be able to generate those data sets, but also to develop high quality ones. Then the next step in that is once we have used that data in order to help with decision-making processes and maybe systems change, it's relatively easy to bring that into implementation across the whole province because it's a single coordinated system. I'll have more to talk about the downside of that later on if we have time, but that's one of the things I think that's important. And this is probably something Matt would also refer to, and that is, as we move forward and looking at technologies like synthetic data, having a system like ours which can create those large, high-quality data sets feeds into opportunities around the way we use synthetic data. So there are a couple of thoughts there.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Mike and ask you, Mike, what are your donors looking for in the way of health innovation? What successes have you seen? What are some of the bottlenecks? What are the expectations of the funders?
Thank you, Justin. So what I would say the donors are really looking for is they're really wanting to, like I said before, they want access to the best care possible, and they're very focused on their own experience and and the outcomes. And so they feel that if there's any innovations in the world, that as Albertans, we should have access to them. And so they're willing to invest in making that possible, whether it's investing in the research to prove out new ways of doing things. A lot of times, I'm not looking necessarily at digital companies, but a lot of innovations in the delivery of care. And they're very interested in investing in those changes of the delivery of care that will improve their experience and their outcomes. And I'll just use one example that sort of illustrates this. And I think there could probably be many parallel digital examples, but the Calgary Health Trust, about a couple of years ago, there was an innovative procedure called anterior hip surgery that basically allowed orthopedic surgeons to, they needed a specialized piece of equipment that allowed them to do a procedure in a different way that effectively allowed them to very quickly operate and allow someone to return to work much more quickly. And it was effectively almost an outpatient procedure that it became. And it was incredibly valuable to the system because it reduced the sort of draw on inpatient beds. It also was a better experience for the patient because they're able to return to work more quickly, and the outcomes were better. And so it was sort of a triple win for everyone. And that's what excites our donors. They want to be able to see that their investment, and a lot of times we're working with SCNs, strategic clinical networks, and other companies to sort of pilot or test different ideas to see if they will work. And again, back to Martin's comment about the advantages of a provincial health system, is that if they can prove out and make some initial investment, philanthropic investment, to test or try out a certain pilot and get it to work, then we can scale it up across the system. And really, I would say the other thing that the donors are really interested in is the efficiency of the system. We've seen some feedback through things like the McKinnon report and the EY review that would be somewhat critical of the value per dollar we're getting out of healthcare. And I think donors are concerned about that. And so they want to see improvements in not just the experience and the outcomes, but also in the overall efficiency and value for dollar of the system. So those are some of the things that I hear from donors regularly.
Thanks, appreciate that. So speaking of some of the challenges, one of the biggest limitations to digital health technology is its adoption within the public health system. We've all heard the concerns and challenges of adopting these technologies into the public health system. So I'd like Martin to kick us off at discussing some of those challenges and what he's found in his experience.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I would say one of the barriers that we've encountered, I think many would agree with this, is that Alberta tends to be rather conservative in its approach to the access to data. In the privacy regulations in Alberta are some of the most stringent in the country, and they seem to be somewhat malaligned with what the general public is looking for in terms of enabling their data to be able to inform improved care and an improved healthcare system. So some creative thinking around that area, I think, is really important, some freeing up of access to data, while at the same time assuring us of the safety of our information. The other thing I'd like to point out is, and I think it was just touched on in a way by Mike, and that is one of the downsides, I'm contradicting myself in a way with having a single system, is that we have a tendency when we're thinking about adopting a technology to look at it system-wide. In other words, we say, is this technology deployable system-wide? Rather than, could we deploy this technology in a small pilot or in a progressively enlarging pilot so that we can build the evidence without having to essentially set the bar so high in terms of evidence that we have to meet that bar in order to roll it out province-wide. It's a sort of, we're lacking the intermediate steps, I think. And so some approaches that enable us to pilot new ideas and to fund those new ideas with some actual healthcare dollars to make it happen would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Matt, do you want to weigh in on this? I know you have some views on this too.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've been lucky enough to work across a hospital, consulting firm, startup, and now especially at Ultima, getting exposed a bit more to other industries that aren't healthcare and life sciences. So there's two parts to this in my mind. One is working outside the public sector. I thought, selling innovative solutions, I'd be in the land of milk and honey and it would just go smoothly and go well. But in reality, getting innovation adopted is always going to be a challenge, no matter the industry. Martin's brought up some great points about data access, which is a struggle. But the other thing I think is really important is aligning incentives for adoption. So anyone who's read the EY report is probably run into those different funding models. And using the example of acute care, where I've seen the public sector get much better at adopting innovation, especially on the digital side, is when there's an incentive to do it. So in funding models, you can fund a hospital through a global budget. You might say University Hospital gets X million per year, but there's also innovative systems like bundled payments, where if the hospital is able to do a service at a lower cost, they can then reinvest that money into services, infrastructure, innovation, things like that. So using a bit more of incentives to align with adoption is where I see the public sector could really move to do more here.
Okay. Reg, anything you would like to add on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to pick up from a comment that Martin had made with respect to sort of the system approach. So one of the challenges we have is that idea of something throughout the whole product. But the other aspect of it is change the view from protecting users of the health system to enabling them to drive better health care outcomes. And so when we're talking about data, not only is it about access to data, but it's also our own health system using that data to drive better public health as well. And so we do have vast amounts of data, and even within our own system, we need to effectively use that data to understand better where to deploy resources so we can drive better health outcomes. So that's a key there. The second part is sort of that culture of being able to be more user-centric. So less focused about how the system deploys and more focused to the patient's needs and how they can drive better health. And so that's a cultural shift that will have to occur, not only in Alberta, but I think across Canada.
Great, thank you. We hear a lot of comparisons of the Canadian health system versus the US system. Any thoughts from the panelists, perhaps Matt or Martin, around the difficulty or ease of which you can deploy digital technologies in Canada, say, versus the US?
Sure, I can start here. So I was lucky enough when I was in Toronto to work with a lot of US companies. We did some consulting work with them, specifically in the area of diagnostics. So there's two different parts to this question in my mind. Is one is development and one is deployment. So from the development side, as Canadians, we actually do have some intrinsic advantages. If we look at the current COVID crisis, to be honest, I'd rather have a solution developed in Canada versus the US. Reason being is healthcare utilization really affects the data and essentially the predictions you're going to make. So it's been shown a few times with different areas of infectious disease. If you have mild symptoms, the disease tends to be underreported in the US because a subset of the population can't afford healthcare. So for COVID, for example, if you have flu-like symptoms and you can't afford healthcare, you're not going to interact with the system and be appropriately diagnosed. And this has happened for a number of analyses they've done. Versus a universal healthcare system like Canada, we have the advantage of everyone interacting with the healthcare system and getting better data from that. And that breaks out of infectious disease as well with, let's say, heart failure patients. If you can't afford healthcare, you're not doing the preventative measures. And so you might be seeing sicker patients than what you would in a universal healthcare population. So I think as Canadians, we have an advantage in the development area. The only caveat being data quality can be an issue in Canada because we don't use it as much as the US. And I've seen that in everything from costing data polls to other areas. But that's something that can be overcome. I've never worked with a doctor who didn't know the problems inherent in the data they have. So for the other part, the adoption, to be blunt, the US is ahead of us. Talking to a few different experts from the US, for example, people from HIMSS and other areas, the US is at the cutting edge of a variety of areas like, let's say, septic shock prediction. Duke Hospital is a leader in that. Insofar as even now, US hospitals are being sued in the US if they're not adopting digital innovation when it's shown to be the best standard of care. So the US system does have an edge in adoption, but no company these days in this space focuses on just the jurisdiction they're in. So I think we have such an advantage in Alberta because we have the right data set, we have the talent here, and there's nothing stopping us from selling into the US market while we push adoption locally.
If I could ask the panelists, what types of skill sets make for a successful digital health entrepreneur? What are some of the talents and personality traits that are key to success? Reg, you want to start?
Sure, I can jump in. One of the things that's critical, and you can hear from all of our comments here, is this concept of digital literacy, understanding the power of data and how one can use data. and the limitations and opportunities that we have around the data sets that are currently here. Folks need to get better equipped with how we can use data going forward, and that's going to be a key strength. The other strength that you would need in this space is, as I mentioned before, healthcare is going through transformation. And so we need to move away from front-facing applications that are about care delivery and more look at how do we transform the system to change. And so there are a number of pieces all along the healthcare value chain that needs to be disrupted for us to be able to truly take the value of digital care out into the market. And so being able to understand all the pieces of that entire healthcare value chain and understand how they're linked together, and then being able to transform that is going to be a key strength that people are going to have or need to have to be able to move something forward in this emerging sector.
Martin, do you want to weigh in? Did I lose you, Martin? Or Matt?
I think Martin's on mute.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry. Yeah. Some of the usual ones are things like creativity, agility, passion, fearlessness, and so on. I think one of the others I would point out that is particular to being an entrepreneur in Alberta and Canada is that that's not where your market is going to be initially. Your market is going to be probably in the US. And so having the connections and the understanding to be able to deploy in the US and fit in with that environment is really important. And so it's very difficult to just translate your Alberta context and imagine that somehow you can squeeze it into the US. So having those networks and support systems is really important, I think.
Matt, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I'd say a key area I've seen a number of companies struggle in is looking towards the end line. So how's your solution going to be reimbursed or essentially procured by the system is often looked at too late in the process. And so it's something you can learn. It's not a, that mysterious of a skill set. There's some great groups like Steve Blank out of the US who looks into how you engage reimbursement early on. And I've seen it, not just Canadian companies, but US companies stumble there because if you're not developing a solution that can be procured by the system, even if it's great at face value, there's some weird systems of procurement that you're just going to run into.
Great. All right, I'm going to take a couple of questions now from our audience. Here's a good one. There have been a lot of things implemented rapidly during the response to COVID-19. What are you excited about, and what do you hope will stick and be utilized beyond the response to the pandemic? Open up to anyone on the panel.
I think there's a great opportunity for us to capitalize on remote healthcare delivery. We're all becoming very adept at using video conferencing systems. There are many other technologies that can be incorporated into the healthcare assessment environment, whether that's monitoring patients at home or monitoring them in a clinical setting. We have the basic infrastructure to enable us to do it. And so I think we should keep the momentum up, both in urban Alberta, but also in rural Alberta.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and sort of second that comment. This whole concept, Justin, of virtual care, being able to interact with a clinician, not in a face-to-face manner, that could include video conferencing, that it could include just audio, or it could include electronic messaging. These are all systems that we're starting to see the health system adopt, and I would love for that to be the way we do business in healthcare going forward beyond the crisis.
So maybe I could give an example, Justin, of this, because this is a made in Alberta example of how we could really move this forward. So a small startup that we're working with from Medicine Hat, Alberta, has developed a markerless motion capture system, Kinetisense. And what this enables you to do is to point a $250 camera that measures in 3D and look at a whole range of different assessments, range of motion, balance, gait, and so on and so on. This completely revolutionizes the way we can look at assessing someone who's in a remote location. And it's a technology that we've developed. And so what I'm hoping is that we can take that kind of an advance, demonstrate it in Alberta to show how effective it is, and then look at how we can monetize models around that going forward, globally.
Great. Mike, any thoughts from the philanthropic zone around COVID and what we hope to take away learnings from this in terms of tech adoption?
Absolutely, Justin. We have actually, we've seen some amazing collaboration across the sort of health foundations across the province. There's nearly 69 across the province, but we've seen some really some stepping up of that group, as well as other nonprofits within communities. And it's great to see that level of collaboration increasing as they're really seeing this crisis and working together to identify the best needs. And a great example is, sometimes we think of healthcare as sort of hospitals and the primary care network. One of the health challenges we're seeing in communities as a response to the COVID crisis with isolation, and that is just mental health supports. And one of the things that the nonprofit or the health foundations have combined is to, along with the mental health foundation, to invest in Text for Hope, which is a pretty simple technology solution from the standpoint is it subscribes a number of people and sends out daily texts that help them, give them messages of hope and some additional content to sort of help guide their mental health in a positive way. And so I think the collaboration has been really neat to see. And we've seen everything from, immediate needs around vulnerable populations to clinical trials that have come up in very short notice, and to see everyone wanting to move these things forward and really be open to moving quickly. It's been great.
Great. I'm going to ask another question, and I'll open up to the panelists as well. If you could change one thing in our health system to see more receptivity to digital health innovations, what would it be? There was some allusions to a couple of things around data previously, but would love to have your thoughts on where can we focus our energy, and what would be the most important thing to adapt in our health system to see more receptivity to digital health innovations.
I'll jump in very quickly, Justin. I think it's speed of adoption is the key here, and being able to look at distinct opportunities where we can trial a new technology platform or a new application in a small setting, as Martin had indicated, and then decide how to scale that across the province for use. That speed, with our ability to do that while still maintaining patient safety, is going to be our success factor here. If we can do that, then we'll be successful.
Matt, any views?
So I think the point before about incentives, unless they align with the adopting innovation, it's always going to be slow, because in healthcare, we have to consider safety of the patient, privacy. And I think as Canadians, we've gone too far on the conservative spectrum. But the way to realign that is to find a way in which to incentivize health systems, doctors, what have you, to actually adopt these technologies. Because right now it is, or it can be, an uphill battle.
Okay. So I'm wondering, and this is a question from our audience, wondering how the general public is being educated on these new digital medical platforms. Studies show that early adopters of these innovative tools will support and help commercialize our transforming healthcare system. There's a lot of platforms out there. It's quite confusing for the uninformed consumer on how to use these tools and where to go and what's best and what's not. Any advice from the panelists on this question?
So I can hop in here. I think one thing that's hard in our health system today is oftentimes the general populace doesn't understand how the sausage of healthcare gets made. And not everything with innovation has to be used by the broader public. But I think one thing that's really needed is more of a conversation on, and I've seen a few questions on this in the group, of how their health data is being used or when it's not. Because I know from my personal perspective, if I was asked whether or not, or I would want my health data used to help other people, even if there was a risk to it, I would want to. And I think that's an important part of our system, is the altruism that comes with these platforms that I think as a system, we don't do a good job of explaining.
I'd like to add actually two really quick ones, Justin. One of them is that we have I think a disproportionate, compared to other benchmark countries, expectation that entrepreneurs put in matching funds in order to access government program investment. So the SBIR program in the United States is a good example of this. No matching funds required, fast fail, not ideally quick in terms of the review process, but a rigorous process to make sure that what gets funded is good. But once you have been identified as good, then there is no requirement for you to come forward with complex, creative ways of showing that you're matching. And I think that's an unnecessary barrier and could be removed. The second quick one was in tech transfer, where we've got something that we're wanting to take through the tech transfer process. I think we need more of a bespoke approach. In other words, a particular kind of technology needs its hand held from beginning to end. It needs a mentor, it needs support. And at the moment, our tech transfer processes are far too generic and far too large, in my view, to be able to support some of these niche but very interesting and compelling new innovations that are coming about.
Thank you. Here's another question from our audience. Can you, one of you on the panel, give us an example of where augmented reality is used effectively in the health system? And are there examples where blockchain is being used in a practical sense? Anyone want to speak to examples they have in either augmented reality or blockchain in the health system?
Yep, that's our business. That's what we do quite a bit of in my lab. I'm broadening it, not just augmented reality, but also just extended reality, VR, AR, and the combination of both. So one example that is quite compelling is used for people with PTSD, particularly in Canadian Forces and first responders. We've got an international collaborative program with the Glen Rose that is looking at how that can be used in order to reduce PTSD symptoms. And preliminary data so far is very, very encouraging compared to alternative approaches. Other approaches include things like a simulated examination that we have for our students, which is called an OSCE exam, which is an exam that causes them to have to interact with a patient in order to practice their patient assessment skills. That OSCE is a very frightening experience for our students. So what we're able to do is provide a simulation of that OSCE in a highly interactive and immersive way so that the students can practice the techniques of interacting with a patient before they actually do the real exam. So instead of us examining a student's ability to handle their nerves in going into the OSCE exam, we can actually examine their content. So those are two quick examples, but there are many, many examples where this can be used.
Matt, would you have any examples in your world that you've come aware of?
Less familiar with the augmented reality. We focus more on machine learning. So where we'd work would be more on voice recognition, natural language processing. I could tell you a few of those, but not related to AR right now.
And on blockchain?
I'll make a mention on blockchain.
Sure.
It's very early days, but an opportunity that's been discussed in the industry is around clinical trials. One of the things our listeners would probably know is that companies spend a lot of time and resources on clinical trials to prove safety and then efficacy for our patients for any therapeutic that they're developing. But one of the opportunities now is, can we share those learnings from clinical trials amongst companies? And so blockchain is offering an opportunity for us to do that. It isn't up and running in that way yet, but people are starting to look at that problem to say, can companies share the information that comes from one clinical trial with another company so that they can drive forward their clinical trial as well? And so this opportunity to speed up that entire process using a blockchain platform is something that's being contemplated now, and very interesting to see if it'll come to fruition.
Great. Okay. Here's another question along those lines. Given the context of the pandemic, is blockchain technology able to jump in immediately and help in any way to address the worldwide problem, or is it more of a long-term goal once the world moves on beyond COVID-19?
So I can hop in here. I've seen some amazing ideas related to COVID blockchain. Everything from sourcing of medical equipment. So one problem right now is with the shortages, you might expand outside of your normal companies you procure from. So following that along, or even innovative solutions to track the patient more effectively. So there's a number of ways blockchain can, I think, influence post-COVID. And there are some great examples of people who have worked on this in Canada. I know Boehringer Ingelheim is a good example that they piloted with blockchain to help their business. So I'd say it's newer in this ecosystem, but there are some wins on the table and great.
Okay, thank you. Martin, anything in your world around that you would surmise? You might be on mute again.
There we go. Not within the COVID envelope, but I certainly think this is a very important future way of providing those assurances around confidentiality that is going to be an empowerment of the kind of analysis that we'd like to be able to do. And I wanted to just mention one other related thing, and that is the emerging opportunities around synthetic data, where what we do is use data sets that can be collected in an environment like Alberta. So, for example, with ABJHI, we've been collecting data on hip and knee replacements since 2006. If you're in another province that hasn't collected that data, you don't have access to any kind of modeling, longitudinal modeling. So take the COVID as an example. So as a result of the COVID epidemic, what we're going to see is a lot of procedures that are going to be delayed because they're elective procedures. We're going to have to work our way through that in order to get to the other side and get back to some form of steady state. So complex modeling is going to be needed if we're going to do that in an optimized and effective way. And some of the ways we can do that is by actually learning through this experience and then sharing our data with other jurisdictions through simulating their population and populating their data with the learnings that we have from our data. And that's essentially the concept in a nutshell of what synthetic data can do. There are tools to do this now. So Cynthia is an example, or Hazy is an example of a tool that has been developed in the US to do this kind of analysis. What we can do is to provide services around that and monetize that concept. Cynthia is an open source tool that we can access very readily. So I think this whole area is an area that we can contribute to, and we should be jumping on top of as we go through the crisis and start planning for the future.
Great, thank you. Here's a question on more of the softer side of implementation in a big system. So part of the digital system changes in healthcare that are required include the building of transparent and trusting partnerships with egos left at the door. What are the panelists' views on this?
I'll jump in. One of the things that we know in the health sector is that in comparison to other sectors, the collaboration opportunity with industry is not as strong. And when we are faced with challenges within the health system, what we need to do is look at partnership opportunities. And there's a lot of talent, innovation, and capability in our company, both local companies as well as large multinational companies, to help us solve these key problems that we're developing. Other sectors have figured out how to work with industry to solve these problems. We, from policy leadership and a culture change, should be able to do that as well. We're missing out on that opportunity to innovate with industry. We need to have them at the table, and that's a key strategy that's going to help us move forward on this front.
Good, thank you. Here's an interesting question. So this audience member just had their first telephone medical appointment this week, which was made possible due to COVID-19 distancing requirements. Up till recently, most professionals would require patients to come in person, and now a telephone or Zoom type appointment would have sufficiently worked. Has it been the case that our healthcare system has been the lagger or limiter of the adoption of current new technologies? And if so, what needs to be done with this framework in order to speed up adoption of new technologies? We've talked a little bit about this, but it is a pressing issue for a lot of our public. Any other thoughts to add on this particular question?
So what I would add would be funding.
Oh, sorry, Martin, go ahead, please.
I would just say that one of the difficulties in the past has been that that clinicians have not been able to be reimbursed for their time in delivering those kinds of consultations. And so that's a barrier that has been removed by COVID temporarily. And so the question will be, can we sustain that in time as we get on the other side?
So Justin, I'll jump in with one comment, and I'm actually picking up on a comment from one of our listeners who's tapped in with some thoughts here around procurement and innovation. One of the challenges we have in Canada, the way that our health systems operate, is that innovation and the ability to try new things are tied directly to procurement. And that is one of the biggest barriers. So if we can separate those and enable clinicians to partner with innovators, to look at new solutions, to see how they can impact their practice and impact their patients' care without having to tie that to a procurement decision that has to be made for the entire jurisdiction, like the province of Alberta, for example, that is going to speed up adoption very quickly. And so one of our recommendations is to split up that idea of trying innovation and having that linked directly to procurement. As Martin said, for most of our companies, their market is in the US anyway. And so, or around the world, let's not tie procurement to innovation. Once we separate that, we're going to increase the pathway for innovation in our system.
Okay.
So if I can jump on that, Justin,
Sure.
I think that's a really good point. In fact, I feel the role of the Calgary Health Trust and other nonprofits is to help step in, not necessarily to physically separate the procurement, but to provide another source of revenue to really advance a lot of these innovations. And we play a unique role because we're not only working very closely with AHS on innovations through strategic clinical networks, but we're also trying to listen to the patients and what their expectations are. There was a comment earlier and a question about, how do we sort of educate the public about what they, and it's fascinating talking to the public about healthcare because they have this love-hate with the healthcare system. They think it's amazing because it's a public, universally accessible system, and they absolutely hate it at certain times because of the experience that they get and the outcomes in some cases. So I think that we need to, I agree with that separation that Reg talked about, but really if we do a better job of educating the public, recognizing that there's certain sort of elements of the status quo around healthcare that they really are rejecting, and they're wanting to see innovation and improvement. And then if we can work together with that sort of checking the egos at the door with innovators to identify what are those things that are going to advance us, and ourselves as sort of nonprofit organizations and health foundations can step up and provide some funding. I think there really is some potential to innovate and to make real significant changes.
Great. We're approaching the end of our time here today, so I'm wondering if I could ask each panelist just to give a summary point, a closing remark from their perspective, something you want to leave this audience with today with this topic and the things that we should keep in mind. And any panelists can jump in first off, but I'd love for each of you to give a quick comment.
Sure, I'll jump in, Justin. One of the things that we've seen with the current crisis is this opportunity for us all to jump in and work together. We're seeing collaboration in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think what I'd like to see is that continue on beyond the crisis situation. And what that takes is public policy leadership and transparency. For us to move the needle on digital health and health transformation, We need to be public about what are the things that we want to change and how are we going to try to move that, and then a call to action for all of us to do that. If we do that publicly and transparently, say these are the things we're trying to move and this is how we're trying to do it, the public will be very supportive in us as a community trying something, even if we fail, but moving the needle forward on it. So changing that idea of having that communication with public, taking a point from Mike and saying, these are the things that we're going to try to move for Albertans, for example. Maybe it's remote care for access for all Albertans, but doing that in a public way. And that way also educating and bringing in the buy-in from our citizens will be something that I'd love to see going forward.
I would add to that I think one of the experiences I would say I've seen is that the conversations we've had, the brainstorming conversations we've had have been very different during the crisis in that they are much more accepting of risky ideas. They are, let's get it done rather than let's find a reason why we can't do it. That has tended to be the kind of conversation I feel I've had over the years, and this has changed that. So the question in my mind is, can we sustain it? Can we sustain the can-do, fail fast, let's get stuck in, and as Reg says, let's do it collaboratively. But this is a culture change, I think, that we could capitalize on.
Thank you. Mike or Matt?
So I can hop in here. I think we've heard it time and time again of the opportunity in Canada and Alberta. And I think more than ever, it's true. And it's up to us as a community to do more to push this forward and just not take no as an answer. Reg and Martin both brought up great points on how we can do this. But I think, I mean, from the get-go, it's Canadian researchers that discovered insulin, created synthetic insulin, that went to another market. We have all the building blocks here, and we just need to kind of be stubborn and keep at it, because the opportunity not only to build the economy, but to truly help people here. And
Thanks, Matt. Mike.
Yeah, I would just say that I really think there is an appetite for change, and I think as Martin mentioned and others, I think there's a real opportunity with some of the positives we've seen through this COVID challenge. But I think there really is an appetite for change. There's an expectation that we get more value for the dollar in our public healthcare dollar. There's also an expectation that care delivery will change. And I think there's mechanisms within AHS that are supportive of that. But I think as the public is louder and as we all, as innovators, try to push that agenda and collaborate, we can actually have an impact. And I'm happy to play a role in that ecosystem as a funder. So.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today for offering your wisdoms, your insights into this very important topic. In my mind, the need for persistence, which was articulated clearly before, is vital. And we shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste, as we've heard many, many times. One of the best lines that I've heard recently is, in our rush to return to normal, use this time to consider which parts of normal are not worth rushing back to. And I think we all need to take that to heart as to how do we use this crisis time that we have and where we've used innovation and ingenuity to change things, and how do we bring that forward into our world, into the future. So Coyle, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks everyone, and thanks for the audience for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wish we could give like a big round of applause and our amazing panelists would hear it. Unfortunately, we just can kind of like silently clap, but that was incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to go through all of them. If you guys are interested in this topic again, we'd be more than happy to have it back on our webinar. So please let us know, like, comment, share on our things. You'll notice I posted a few things in the chat, so thank you so much for everyone who took our live poll. I'm really excited that the next event that we have coming up is the one that was most interesting for everyone. So we do have a great group of panelists all talking about how we can support and maintain our technology ecosystem during COVID-19. I think this will be a really important topic for everyone. So there is a link. You can go onto our Eventbrite page and find it and signed up. We'd love to engage with you on that one. I also want to put a shout out to our Canadian Blockchain Association for Women. So far, they're doing a fundraiser to get the medical masks needed for our frontline workers out in Ontario, where they're being hit the most hard. So if anyone can support that fundraiser, that'd be amazing. We'll have proof of purchase and delivery once our fundraiser is over. But thank you guys so much. I hope you all are staying really safe and healthy. I know a lot of us are learning how to adapt to this new work from home. It's a lot of fun with a 3-year-old sitting on your lap a lot of the time, but definitely getting used to it, and love that we can still engage with this incredible community and any way that we can to provide value. So I know this time is really hard. If you want to reach out, if you have a business and you want to reach out to us, we are more than happy to help support you by marketing and promoting and getting your stuff out there to see if we can find ways to support your business. If there's topics that are meaningful, please let us know about it on our social media. We want to make sure that we're engaging and providing value even during this time that we can't see you. So I'd love to give everyone a hug. Unfortunately, I can't right now, not that I'm sick, but just because I'm home. But thank you all so much for joining again, and I look forward to seeing you April 16th, 11:30 a.m. for our next webinar. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you again to all of our amazing attendees.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.